Montana Territory, 1873. The bitter wind swept across the rolling plains, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Isaac Jacobson pulled his hat lower over his eyes as he guided his horse along the ridge overlooking the settlement of Pine Creek. Below him, the fledgling town struggled against the wilderness. A dozen buildings, a general store, and a saloon where men drowned memories of the war that had torn the nation apart less than a decade earlier. At 25, Isaac had already seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. The scars on his body told stories he never shared, and the ones inside kept him moving, never settling, never trusting. "No point in getting attached to anything out here," he muttered to his paint stallion Ranger. "The frontier takes everything eventually." The horse nickered in response, steam rising from its nostrils in the early spring chill. Isaac adjusted the Winchester rifle in its saddle holster and nudged Ranger down the slope toward town. He'd been hired to help drive a cattle herd north to Fort Benton, and Pine Creek was where he'd meet the outfit. 2 months of hard riding lay ahead, just how he preferred life. No roots, no attachments, no disappointments. Isaac had learned young that the West was no place for sentiment. His father had died in a Sioux raid when he was 14, his mother from fever 2 winters later. By 17, he was riding with a Texas outfit, hardening himself against the elements and human connection alike. The war between the states had only reinforced his belief that survival meant keeping to yourself. As he approached the town's single dusty street, he cataloged his needs. Supplies, ammunition, perhaps a hot meal before the drive began. What he didn't need was the complication of company beyond what the job required. The cattle drive would pay enough to keep him moving for months afterward, drifting as he always had. Just passing through, he reminded himself, always just passing through. The buildings of Pine Creek stood defiant against the wilderness, though most looked weather-beaten and hastily constructed. Isaac tied Ranger outside the general store, the one building that appeared sturdy enough to withstand the frontier's harsh judgment. A bell tinkled as he pushed open the door, the warm air inside a stark contrast to the chill outside. What happened next would change everything Isaac believed about his carefully constructed solitude. She stood behind the counter, 19 years old with honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical but becoming style, wisps framing a face that struck Isaac like a physical blow. Her dress was simple blue calico, worn but well kept, with a white apron tied at her narrow waist. But it was her smile, warm, genuine, reaching all the way to eyes the color of a summer sky, that made Isaac forget the list of supplies he'd mentally prepared. "Good afternoon," she greeted him, her voice musical. "You must be one of Mr. Patterson's cowboys for the drive. I'm Olivia Jensen." Isaac stood frozen, hat in hand, acutely aware of his trail dust and the days of stubble on his jaw. He cleared his throat. "Isaac Jacobson, ma'am, how'd you know I'm with the Patterson outfit?" Her smile widened. "Small town, everyone knows everything. Mr. Patterson's been through twice this week mentioning he's expecting hands." "And you have that look." "What look would that be?" he asked, finding his voice. "Like you belong in a saddle more than on solid ground," she replied, her gaze direct but not unkind. "Now, what can I help you with today, Mr. Jacobson?" Isaac managed to remember his supplies, watching as Olivia efficiently gathered coffee, ammunition, tobacco, and other necessities. Her movements were graceful, practical. Nothing like the saloon girls he occasionally encountered with their practiced flirtations, nor the hard-faced frontier women who'd survived by becoming as tough as the men around them. "You passing through with the herd?" she asked conversationally. "Yes, ma'am, 2 months to Fort Benton, then wherever the trail takes me after that." Olivia paused, studying him. "My father says a man without a destination is either running from something or hasn't found what he's looking for yet." The observation hit uncomfortably close to home. Isaac shifted his weight. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she replied softly, "passed 2 winters ago, influenza." "I'm sorry to hear that," Isaac said, genuinely meaning it. "You run this place alone." "My brother Joseph helps when he can, but he's mostly working our claim outside town." She tied his purchases efficiently with twine. "We came out from Pennsylvania after the war. Father thought the West would offer more opportunity." "And has it?" Isaac couldn't help asking. Something flickered across her face, determination perhaps, or resignation. "It's demanded more than we expected, but we're making our way." She pushed the bundle toward him. "That'll be $3.45. As Isaac counted out the money, the door opened behind him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as three men entered, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Miss Jensen," the leader drawled, ignoring Isaac completely, "thought I made myself clear last week." Olivia's smile disappeared, her posture stiffening. "And I thought I made myself clear as well, Mr. Hargrove. The store isn't for sale." The man Hargrove stepped closer to the counter. He was expensively dressed for the frontier, his coat cut from fine wool, his boots polished leather. The two men behind him had the hard look of hired guns. $500 is more than generous for a failing business in a town that won't last another year, Hargrove continued. "Once the railroad bypasses Pine Creek, you'll be begging for half that offer." Isaac remained still, watching. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved in local disputes was exactly the sort of entanglement he avoided. "My father built this store," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the color rising in her cheeks. "It supports my brother and me just fine. Now, if you're not here to make a purchase, I have a customer to attend to." Hargrove finally acknowledged Isaac with a dismissive glance. "This drifter, he'll be gone with the dust of the Patterson herd," he leaned forward. "I want an answer by the end of the week, Miss Jensen. My patience is wearing thin." "She already gave you an answer," Isaac said before he could stop himself. "Seems clear enough to me." The silence that followed was dangerous. Hargrove turned slowly, assessing Isaac with cold eyes. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy." "Just making an observation," Isaac replied mildly, though his right hand had drifted closer to the Colt on his hip. "Seems to me a lady has the right to decide her own business matters." One of Hargrove's men shifted position, his coat opening to reveal a holstered pistol. Isaac recognized the move for what it was: preparation. "Isaac," Olivia said, her voice cutting through the tension, "your supplies are ready." The use of his first name caught him off guard, as did the look in her eyes, not fear but a warning. With deliberate calm, Isaac picked up his bundle. "Much obliged, Miss Jensen," he tipped his hat. "Gentlemen, good day." Hargrove stepped aside, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy your cattle drive, cowboy. Long, dangerous trip to Fort Benton." The threat wasn't subtle. Isaac nodded once and walked out, every sense alert until he was back on the street. He secured his purchases to Ranger's saddle, but instead of mounting, he leaned against the hitching post, considering the encounter. The smart move would be to ride to the Patterson camp now and forget the exchange. Pine Creek's problems weren't his concern. Yet he found himself waiting, watching the store door until Hargrove and his men emerged 15 minutes later. They mounted expensive horses and rode toward the larger building at the end of the street with a sign identifying it as the Frontier Hotel. Only then did Isaac enter the store again. Olivia stood by a window watching Hargrove's departure. She turned at the sound of the bell, surprise evident on her face. "You came back," she said. "Forgot something," Isaac replied, though he hadn't. "Who is Hargrove?" Olivia sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Ezekiel Hargrove. He arrived 6 months ago, buying up properties, claiming he represents Eastern investors planning for when the railroad comes through." "And you don't believe him?" "I believe he wants control of the town before anyone realizes the railroad might actually come through the valley," she said. "He's already bought the hotel, the livery, and 2 other businesses. Those who won't sell have had accidents." Isaac nodded slowly. He'd seen similar schemes in other frontier towns. "Your brother Joseph, right? Is he watching his back?" "As much as possible. He comes in for supplies every few days, but our claim is showing promise, which makes me worry Hargrove might turn his attention there next." She studied Isaac carefully. "But that's not your concern. You're leaving with the herd tomorrow, aren't you?" "That's the plan." Isaac adjusted his hat. "Patterson's paying good money." "Well then, I wish you safe travels, Mr. Jacobson." Her smile returned, though smaller than before. "The frontier's dangerous enough without making extra trouble." The comment struck Isaac as ironic, coming from a woman standing her ground against a man like Hargrove. He found himself respecting her courage, even as he recognized the foolishness of her position. One woman and her brother couldn't stand against money and guns for long. "Good day, Miss Jensen," he said finally, tipping his hat. "And good luck." As he stepped back into the spring sunlight, Isaac told himself he was doing the right thing. Riding out was the sensible choice. Getting involved would only complicate his life and possibly shorten it. Yet as he mounted Ranger and rode toward the Patterson camp, He found his thoughts returning to Olivia Jensen's direct blue gaze and the quiet determination in her voice. For the first time in years, Isaac Jacobson found himself questioning whether his carefully maintained isolation was wisdom or cowardice. The Patterson outfit was camped 3 miles outside town, near a creek that provided water for both men and beasts. 8 cowboys, a cook, and Patterson himself made up the crew that would drive nearly 800 head of cattle to Fort Benton. Isaac introduced himself to Patterson, a gruff man in his 50s with a reputation for fair dealing and successful drives. Jacobson, Patterson acknowledged, looking him over. Heard you're good with cattle and better with a gun, that true. Never lost a steer to rustlers on my watch, Isaac replied simply. Good, we'll need both skills. Blackfoot territory's been quiet lately, but there's always chance of trouble. Patterson gestured toward the camp. Chuck's over there, we head out at first light. Isaac settled in, exchanging brief introductions with the other hands, a mix of veterans and younger men looking to prove themselves. He kept to himself through dinner, half listening to conversations about the trail ahead, his thoughts unexpectedly circling back to Pine Creek and the confrontation in the general store. You know anything about a fella named Hargrove? He finally asked one of the older hands, a weathered cowboy called Jenkins. Jenkins spat tobacco juice into the fire. Land speculator, showed up with Eastern money and big plans. Word is he's got connections in the territorial government. Why you asking? Just curious, ran into him in town. Best steer clear, Jenkins advised. Hargrove gets what he wants, one way or another. Last fellow who stood in his way ended up face down in the creek. That a fact, Isaac kept his tone neutral, just saying what I heard. Jenkins shrugged, not our business anyway. We'll be long gone tomorrow. Isaac nodded and turned in early, spreading his bedroll under the vast Montana sky. Stars stretched from horizon to horizon, reminding him of his insignificance in the grand scheme. One woman's problems in a frontier town wouldn't matter in a month, a year, a decade. Towns rose and fell with the tides of commerce and settlement. The strong survived, the stubborn often didn't, yet sleep eluded him. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Olivia Jensen's face, heard her voice, remembered the quiet dignity with which she stood her ground. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, Isaac had made a decision he knew went against every rule of survival he'd established for himself. While the camp stirred awake, Isaac approached Patterson. Need to ride into town before we head out, he said. Won't take long. Patterson frowned. We're moving out in an hour. I'll catch up by midday, Isaac promised. Important business to settle. The older man studied him for a long moment. Your business is your own, but my herd won't wait. You're not back by noon. We'll consider your position open. Understood. Isaac saddled Ranger and rode toward Pine Creek as the sun crested the horizon. The town was just coming to life when he arrived. He tied Ranger outside the general store again, noting the closed sign on the door. A light burned inside, however, and he knocked firmly. After a moment, Olivia appeared, surprise evident when she saw him through the window. She unlocked the door. Mr. Jacobson, I thought you'd be gone with the herd by now. Isaac removed his hat. May I come in, Miss Jensen? I have a proposition for you. Curiosity replaced surprise as she stepped aside. Inside, the store smelled of coffee and fresh bread. A small table in the back held the remains of her breakfast. I'm sorry to intrude on your morning, Isaac began, feeling unexpectedly nervous. But I've been thinking about your situation with Hargrove. It's kind of you to worry, but as I said, it's not your concern. Despite her words, Olivia watched him with interest. I'm making it my concern, Isaac replied. I'd like to delay my departure and stay in Pine Creek for a few days. Keep an eye on things until your brother returns. Olivia's eyes widened. Why would you do that? You don't know us. It was a fair question, one Isaac had asked himself repeatedly during his sleepless night. Let's just say I've spent too long riding away from other people's troubles. And what would this assistance cost me? Her directness was refreshing, if a bit discomfiting. Room and board, Isaac said. I'll sleep in your storeroom if you've got one, help around the store. When your brother returns, I'll catch up with the Patterson outfit or find another drive heading north. Olivia considered him carefully. Mr. Jacobson, while I appreciate the offer, I have to wonder why a man who clearly prefers solitude would suddenly volunteer to involve himself in a stranger's problems. Isaac hadn't prepared for such a direct challenge. He found himself responding with unexpected honesty. Because I watched my father die trying to protect what was his, and no one stepped up to help, because sometimes doing nothing is the same as doing wrong. And because you had the courage to stand your ground when many wouldn't. The silence that followed felt weighted with possibilities. Finally, Olivia nodded. There's a room behind the storeroom. It's small but clean. I can pay you a fair wage for your help in the store, but I want to be clear. I'm not looking for a hired gun. I'm not offering to be one, Isaac clarified. Just an extra pair of eyes and hands until your brother returns. When is he expected? 4 days, perhaps 5. He checks our claim and hunts on these trips. Then we have an arrangement. Isaac extended his hand. After a brief hesitation, Olivia shook it. Her grip was firm, her hand warm against his calloused palm. We do, Mr. Jacobson, though I suspect you may regret missing your cattle drive. Isaac, he corrected. If I'm staying here, might as well use my given name. Isaac then, her smile returned, transforming her face in a way that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. And you should call me Olivia. Miss Jensen makes me feel like a schoolmarm. For the first time in years, Isaac Jacobson found himself smiling back. A real smile, not the guarded expression he typically offered the world. Olivia it is. The next morning found Isaac sweeping the store's porch as Pine Creek came to life around him. His decision to stay had cost him the Patterson job, but he found himself surprisingly unbothered by this fact. Ranger was comfortably settled in the small stable behind the store, his saddle and gear stowed in the storeroom where Isaac had set up his bedroll. Olivia emerged from inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Isaac. You're up early. Force of habit, he replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Been rising before dawn since I was a boy. On your family's ranch, she asked, leaning against the porch railing. Isaac hesitated, unused to sharing personal details. For a time, we had a small spread in Nebraska territory, nothing fancy, just enough to get by. What happened to it? Her question was gentle but direct. Sioux raiding party. 1862, the words came out clipped. Father died defending it. Mother and I survived, but she never recovered from losing him, died 2 years later. I'm sorry, Olivia said simply. My mother passed when I was 12, childbirth, the baby didn't survive either. Their shared losses hung in the morning air between them. Isaac found himself studying her profile as she gazed down the street. The early light caught the golden highlights in her hair, and he noticed a small scar near her temple, barely visible against her fair skin. Your father brought you west after that? He asked, redirecting the conversation. Olivia nodded. After the war ended, he'd had enough of Pennsylvania and thought Montana offered more opportunity. We arrived 3 years ago. The store was just a tent back then. A hint of pride crept into her voice. Father built this building himself with Joseph's help, said a proper town needed a proper general store. He sounds like a man of vision. He was, she agreed, then straightened as she noticed someone approaching. Good morning, Mrs. Campbell, early shopping today. An older woman with a basket over her arm nodded briskly. Bread day, Miss Jensen, and who might this be? Isaac Jacobson, Olivia replied smoothly. He's helping at the store for a few days while Joseph is checking our claim. Mrs. Campbell's eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed Isaac, not one of Patterson's cowboys. Changed my plans, Isaac said politely. Indeed, the older woman didn't bother hiding her skepticism. Well, Miss Jensen, I'll take my usual order, and perhaps you could tell me whether that fabric I inquired about has arrived. Olivia escorted her customer inside, throwing an apologetic glance over her shoulder at Isaac, who returned to his sweeping. By midday, he'd become aware of the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed his presence. A single woman employing a drifter was clearly fodder for town gossip. Hargrove made his appearance shortly after noon, flanked by the same 2 men as before. They rode slowly past the store, Hargrove tipping his hat mockingly when he noticed Isaac on the porch. The implied threat was clear, but Isaac simply nodded back, his face expressionless. He's making sure you know he's watching, Olivia commented after they had passed. Let him watch, Isaac replied. Men like that count on intimidation working. When it doesn't, they often don't know what to do next. And sometimes they resort to violence, she countered, concern evident in her voice. Sometimes, Isaac agreed, but violence draws attention. My guess is Hargrove prefers operating in the shadows when possible. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a freight wagon carrying supplies Olivia had ordered weeks earlier. Isaac spent the afternoon helping unload and organize the new stock, surprising himself with how easily he fell into the rhythm of the store. By closing time, his back ached from lifting rather than riding, a different kind of tired than he was accustomed to. Olivia cooked a simple but satisfying dinner of beans, bacon, and biscuits, which they ate at the small table in her living quarters behind the store. The domesticity of the scene struck Isaac as they sat across from each other in the lamplight. "You're quieter than usual," Olivia observed, breaking the comfortable silence. "Just thinking," Isaac replied, then found himself elaborating. "It's been a long time since I sat at a proper table for a meal with company. The life of a cowboy doesn't lend itself to dining rooms, I imagine." "No, it doesn't," he hesitated, then continued, "Thank you for dinner and for trusting me enough to let me stay." Olivia studied him over her coffee cup. "You're not what I expected, Isaac Jacobson." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, less," she searched for the word. "Less thoughtful, perhaps." The observation unsettled him. Had he grown so guarded that basic human decency seemed remarkable, or was she seeing something in him that he'd forgotten existed? "The frontier doesn't reward thoughtfulness much," he finally said. "No," she agreed, "but perhaps that's what's wrong with it." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics: the town's characters, the changing seasons, books they had read. Isaac found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years, drawn out by Olivia's genuine interest and lively intelligence. When they finally bid each other good night, he lay awake in the storeroom, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the settling building and wondering how a single day in Pine Creek had affected him more deeply than years of drifting. The next morning, a telegram arrived for Olivia. The concerned expression on her face as she read it caught Isaac's attention. "Bad news?" he asked when the messenger had departed. "Joseph," she said, her voice tight, "he's been delayed. Something about a dispute over our claim boundaries. He says not to worry, but timing seems suspicious," Isaac finished for her. "Exactly," she folded the telegram carefully. "He says he'll be back in another week at most." Isaac nodded slowly. "I'll stay until he returns." Relief crossed her face. "Thank you, I can pay you fair wages for your time." "We already settled that," he reminded her. "Room, board, and keeping an eye on things, that's payment enough." As the day progressed, Isaac found himself watching the street more carefully, noting who entered Hargrove's hotel, who spoke with his men. The pieces of Pine Creek's power structure began falling into place. The mayor who owed Hargrove money, the sheriff who looked the other way during disputes, the businessmen already aligning themselves with what they saw as the winning side. Late in the afternoon, one of Hargrove's men, the taller one with a scar across his chin, entered the store while Olivia was helping Mrs. Campbell select fabric. Isaac stood near the ammunition cabinet, ostensibly organizing stock. "Miss Jensen," the man said, ignoring Isaac completely. "Mr. Hargrove would like to invite you to dinner this evening at the hotel to discuss business opportunities." Olivia didn't look up from the bolt of calico she was measuring. "Please thank Mr. Hargrove for the invitation, but I must decline. As I've mentioned previously, I'm not interested in selling." "He's offering 600 now," the man's voice hardened. "That offer won't stand for long." "The price isn't relevant, Mr. Tucker," Olivia replied, her tone remaining pleasant but firm. "The store isn't for sale at any price." Tucker's eyes narrowed. "Your brother's having trouble with his claim, I hear. Shame if those troubles got worse." At this, Isaac stepped forward, ammunition boxes still in hand. "Those sound heavy," he said casually. "The boxes. Hate to drop them accidentally." Tucker's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol, but he stopped when he saw the cold look in Isaac's eyes. A tense moment passed before the man backed down. "Just delivering a message," Tucker said, his tone deliberately lighter. "No harm in that." He tipped his hat mockingly at Olivia. "Think about the offer, Miss Jensen. Pine Creek's changing. You might want to be on the right side of that chain." After he left, Mrs. Campbell huffed indignantly. "The nerve, as if Ezekiel Hargrove has any right to pressure decent folk." She patted Olivia's hand. "You stand your ground, dear. Your father built this store for the town, not for some speculator's profit." When they were alone again, Olivia sank onto a stool behind the counter. "It's getting worse, the pressure." Isaac leaned against the counter. "Has Hargrove been threatening your brother directly?" Not in words, she replied. But Joseph mentioned men watching our claim, strange markers appearing overnight changing the boundary lines. Now this delay, she looked up at Isaac, worry evident in her blue eyes. What if something's happened to him? Your brother's telegram came through this morning, Isaac pointed out reasonably. He's alive and well enough to send it. Unless someone else sent it to keep me from worrying, Olivia countered. Isaac considered this. Do you know exactly where your claim is? Of course, about 12 miles northeast, along Silver Creek. Joseph built a small cabin there last summer. I could ride out tomorrow, Isaac offered, check on things. Hope flashed across Olivia's face, quickly replaced by concern. That's too dangerous. If Hargrove has men watching the claim. I know how to approach without being seen, Isaac assured her. One day to ride out, look around, and return. And leave me alone here, she gestured around the store. You've managed before I arrived, he reminded her. And Hargrove won't try anything too obvious in town. His whole approach depends on maintaining a veneer of legitimacy. Olivia considered this, her fingers worrying the edge of her apron. If you do this, you'll need to leave before dawn. There's a trail through the North Valley that's less traveled. I know backcountry riding, Isaac said with a slight smile. Trust me. The word hung between them, trust. Something Isaac neither gave nor asked for easily, yet here he was, asking this woman he barely knew to place her faith in him. All right, Olivia finally agreed, but promise me you'll be careful. Joseph can handle himself, and I don't need another person to worry about. I'll be back by nightfall tomorrow, Isaac promised, one quick look to make sure everything's in order. That evening, as they closed the store, Isaac noticed more activity than usual at Hargrove's hotel. Men coming and going, horses being readied despite the late hour, his instincts prickled with warning. Something's happening, he murmured, mostly to himself. Olivia joined him at the window. What do you mean? Hargrove's men are preparing for something, might be nothing to do with us but the timing is suspicious, she finished. Should you still go tomorrow? Isaac considered their options. Now more than ever, better to know what we're facing. Later, as they sat together in the small living area, the lamplight casting warm shadows, Isaac found himself studying the way Olivia's hands moved as she mended a shirt. Capable hands, neither soft nor rough, but somewhere in between, hands that built things, maintained things, carried their share of the world's weight. Tell me about your life before, she said suddenly, looking up from her work. Before you started drifting. Isaac rarely spoke of his past, but something about the quiet intimacy of the moment loosened his usual reserve. Not much to tell. After my mother died, I worked ranch jobs in Nebraska, then Wyoming. Joined up with the Union Army in '64, last year of the war. You fought, her voice held no judgment, only interest. Some. Mostly chased deserters, guarded supply lines, saw enough though. He didn't elaborate on the nightmares that still occasionally woke him, the memories of young men dying in mud and smoke, and after. Drifted west. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, kept moving, he shrugged, never found a reason to stop. Olivia's expression softened. That sounds lonely. Safer, he corrected automatically. Is it? Her question was gentle but direct. Safer than having people who care whether you live or die. The question struck deeper than he expected. Isaac looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. What about you? He asked, changing the subject. Ever think about leaving Pine Creek, starting fresh somewhere else? Sometimes, she admitted, but this is home now, father is buried here. The store represents everything he worked for, everything he believed in about the frontier, that it could be more than just a place of taking and violence, that communities could thrive here. Her voice strengthened with conviction. If I sell to Hargrove, I'm surrendering that vision. Even if staying means danger. Some things are worth fighting for, she replied simply. Her words stayed with Isaac as he prepared for his journey the next morning. Long before dawn, he saddled Ranger in the small stable behind the store, checking his Winchester and Colt by lamplight. Olivia appeared with a bundle of food and a small map she'd drawn of the route to the claim. Be careful, she said, handing him the provisions. Joseph's cabin is just beyond the ridge, near the big lightning-struck pine. I'll find it, Isaac assured her. Keep the doors locked while I'm gone. If Hargrove or his men come by, don't antagonize them. Olivia smiled wryly. I'll be diplomatic. Diplomatic is good, alive is better. On impulse, she reached up and straightened his bandana. The gesture was so domestic, so natural, that it caught them both by surprise. Her hand lingered near his collar, and for a breathless moment, Isaac thought he might do something truly foolish, like pull her close and kiss her. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "I'll be back by nightfall." "I'll hold you to that promise," Olivia replied softly. The ride through the breaking dawn cleared Isaac's head. He followed game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding the main paths where Hargrove might have men watching. The landscape opened around him, rolling hills giving way to scattered pine forests and rocky outcroppings. By mid-morning, he'd reached the vicinity of the Jensen claim, approaching cautiously from the ridge above. What he saw confirmed his worst suspicions. The small cabin Olivia had described was still standing, but a new fence line had been erected, cutting through what appeared to be the original claim boundaries. 3 men worked near the creek, diverting water into a new channel that would leave the Jensen property dry. Their horses were picketed nearby, and Isaac recognized one as belonging to Tucker, Hargrove's right-hand man. Most concerning was the figure tied to a chair on the cabin's porch, a young man with fair hair similar to Olivia's, his face bruised but his posture defiant. Joseph Jensen was alive but clearly a prisoner on his own claim. Isaac retreated to consider his options. 3 armed men against one made for poor odds, especially in open country with little cover. A direct confrontation would likely get both him and Joseph killed. He needed an approach that would even the odds. Circling wide around the claim, Isaac spotted what he needed, a small herd of wild horses drinking at a water hole about half a mile from the cabin. With careful positioning, he could drive them straight through the encampment, creating enough chaos for a rescue attempt. It took an hour of patient maneuvering to get into position. Isaac removed his spurs to move silently, approaching the nervous herd from downwind. When everything was ready, he fired a shot into the air and charged, whooping loudly. The startled horses bolted in the direction he'd anticipated, thundering toward the cabin and the men working by the creek. Isaac rode hard on their flank, guiding the stampede while staying just out of sight. The resulting chaos was exactly what he'd hoped for. Hargrove's men scattered, diving for cover as the horses crashed through their camp. In the confusion, Isaac rode directly to the cabin porch, cutting Joseph's bonds with a single slash of his knife. "Jensen," he confirmed as the young man staggered to his feet. "Who the hell are you?" Joseph demanded, understandably suspicious. "Friend of your sister's," Isaac replied tersely. "Can you ride?" A shout from the creek indicated the men were regrouping. Joseph nodded grimly, despite his obviously painful injuries. "Get me to a horse." Isaac helped him down the steps and toward one of the picketed horses. They'd just reached it when a shot rang out, splintering wood near Isaac's head. He pushed Joseph toward the horse, drawing his Colt and returning fire to cover their escape. "Ride for town," Isaac shouted as Joseph mounted. "I'll hold them off." Joseph hesitated only briefly before spurring the horse toward Pine Creek. Isaac fired twice more, forcing Hargrove's men to take cover, then swung onto Ranger and rode in a different direction, intentionally drawing pursuit away from Joseph. The chase that followed tested all of Isaac's frontier skills. He led Hargrove's men on a winding path through rocky terrain, occasionally doubling back to leave false trails. By mid-afternoon, he'd lost his pursuers and circled back toward Pine Creek, pushing Ranger harder than he liked but knowing time was critical. As he approached town, the setting sun cast long shadows across the single street. Something was wrong. Too many horses were tied outside the hotel, and a crowd had gathered near the general store. Isaac slowed Ranger to a walk, approaching cautiously. The sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Olivia stood on the porch of her store, facing Hargrove and at least a dozen men. Her posture was rigid, her chin held high. Even from a distance, Isaac could see she was frightened but defiant. Of Joseph, there was no sign. Isaac dismounted at the edge of town, tying Ranger in a stand of trees. He approached on foot, staying in the shadows of buildings, straining to hear the confrontation. "Your brother was caught stealing water from legitimate mining operations," Hargrove was saying, his voice carrying in the evening air. "That's a serious offense in the territory." "My brother," Olivia replied clearly, "was on his own legally registered claim. You're the thief, Mr. Hargrove." A murmur ran through the gathered townspeople. Hargrove's face darkened. "Your claim boundaries were incorrectly filed. My surveyors confirmed it." "Your surveyors moved the markers," Olivia countered, "and you kidnapped my brother to try to force me to sell." Serious accusations, Hargrove said smoothly. But where's your proof? Where's your brother now if he was supposedly rescued? Isaac realized with sinking certainty that Joseph hadn't made it to town. Either he'd been recaptured or had taken another route, perhaps not trusting that Pine Creek would be safe. The store and claim are rightfully mine, Hargrove continued, turning to address the townspeople. Miss Jensen's continued resistance is merely delaying progress that will benefit all of Pine Creek when the railroad comes. Isaac had heard enough. He stepped into the street, his voice cutting through the evening air. That's not how it looks from where I'm standing. Heads turned, Olivia's eyes widened at the sight of him, relief and worry battling in her expression. The drifter returns, Hargrove sneered. Alone, I notice. What happened to Joseph Jensen? Free and clear of your men, Isaac replied evenly, continuing to walk forward until he stood between Olivia and Hargrove, who, by the way, were busy altering claim markers and diverting water when I found them. Territorial law takes a dim view of claim jumping, Mr. Hargrove. You have no standing here, Hargrove snapped, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. This is between me and Miss Jensen. Actually, came a new voice from the edge of the crowd, I think I have some standing in this matter. Joseph Jensen limped forward, supported by an older man in a marshal's badge. Though battered, Joseph's expression was triumphant. Marshal Davis, he announced, found him on the trail and told him everything. He was quite interested in Mr. Hargrove's business practices. The territorial marshal stepped forward, his weathered face impassive. Ezekiel Hargrove, I've heard some disturbing accounts about your activities in Pine Creek. Claim jumping, water theft, kidnapping, fraud. Ridiculous, Hargrove blustered, though his confidence was visibly shaken. These people are trying to block legitimate business development. I've got witnesses ready to testify otherwise, Marshal Davis replied calmly, including 3 of your former employees who decided cooperation might lighten their sentences. Isaac glanced at Olivia, who appeared as surprised as everyone else by this turn of events. Her eyes met his and the relief in them made something tighten in his chest. You're under arrest, Mr. Hargrove, the marshal continued. You and your associates can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. For a tense moment, it seemed Hargrove might resist. His hand drifted toward his coat, where Isaac suspected he carried a derringer or similar small weapon. Without obvious movement, Isaac shifted his stance, ready to draw his Colt if necessary. Hargrove must have seen something in Isaac's eyes that convinced him of the futility of resistance. His shoulders slumped slightly. This is a mistake. I have connections in the territorial government. Take it up with the judge, Marshal Davis replied, gesturing to his deputies to take Hargrove and his men into custody. As the crowd dispersed, following the marshal's party toward the makeshift jail, Olivia rushed to her brother. Joseph, are you all right? What happened? Joseph winced as she embraced him. I'm fine, Livy, banged up but nothing broken. Your friend here, he nodded toward Isaac, created quite a distraction. Got me away clean, but I took a wrong turn trying to avoid Hargrove's men. Lucky I ran into the marshal's party. Not luck, Isaac said quietly. Marshal Davis has been investigating Hargrove for months. Joseph's testimony was just what he needed. Olivia turned to Isaac, her eyes searching his face. And you? Are you hurt? Just tired, he assured her, suddenly acutely aware of the dust covering his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. And in need of that dinner you promised. Her smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face in the way that had first caught Isaac's attention. I believe I can manage that. Later, after Joseph had been settled in his room with food and bandages, Isaac and Olivia sat together on the store's porch, watching the stars emerge over Pine Creek. The events of the day had left them both exhausted but too wired to sleep. You could have been killed, Olivia said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them, riding out to the claim alone like that. Could have been, Isaac agreed. Wasn't. Why did you do it? She turned to face him, her expression earnest in the fading light. You barely know us. The sensible thing would have been to ride out with the Patterson herd as planned. Isaac considered her question carefully. The past few days had shaken loose something inside him, disturbing the careful isolation he'd maintained for years. Maybe I'm tired of being sensible, he finally said. Maybe I wanted to do something that mattered for once. And did it matter? Yes, the certainty in his voice surprised even him. It did. Olivia's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the question Isaac had been asking himself since the confrontation ended. The cattle drive was long gone. He could find other work, other herds moving north. Return to the life of drifting, of passing through towns without connecting, of keeping himself separate and safe from other people's troubles. Or he could stay. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Pine Creek was nothing special, just another frontier town struggling to establish itself. But sitting here, with Olivia's hand in his and the knowledge that he had helped protect something valuable, Isaac felt a pull he hadn't experienced in years. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Patterson's herd is long gone." "Pine Creek could use a man who knows horses," Olivia suggested, her tone carefully neutral. "The livery's without an owner now that Hargrove's gone." "Are you offering me a job, Miss Jensen?" Isaac asked, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm suggesting an opportunity, Mr. Jacobson." Her answering smile caught the moonlight. "For a man who might be considering putting down roots." "Roots," he tested the word. "Never been much good at those." "Perhaps you simply haven't found the right soil," Olivia replied softly. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Marshall Davis appeared in the street before them, looking tired but satisfied. "Miss Jensen, Mr. Jacobson," he greeted them. "Thought you'd want to know Hargrove and his men will be transported to Fort Benton tomorrow for trial. The evidence against them is substantial." "What about the claims he seized, the businesses?" Olivia asked. "Court will sort that out," the marshal replied, "but I don't think you need to worry about your store or your brother's claim. Your paperwork is in order and we have witnesses to the tampering." He tipped his hat. "You two should get some rest, been a long day." After he'd gone, Isaac and Olivia remained on the porch, neither willing to break the moment by returning inside. "Stay," Olivia said suddenly, turning to face him fully. "Not just for a job or because Pine Creek needs you. Stay because—" She hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, "because I'd like you too." The directness of her statement, so characteristic of her, struck Isaac powerfully. In that moment, facing this brave, forthright woman, the defenses he'd built over years of solitude seemed not just unnecessary but unwanted. "I'm not an easy man," he warned. "I've spent a long time alone. Don't know if I remember how to be anything else." "I'm not asking for easy," Olivia replied. "I'm asking for real." The simplicity of her answer undid him. With gentle deliberation, Isaac reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. When she didn't pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. When they finally parted, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I'll stay," he whispered, "for as long as you'll have me." "That might be a very long time, Isaac Jacobson," Olivia murmured, her smile evident in her voice. "I'm counting on it," he replied, and kissed her again under the vast Montana sky. 3 months later, Pine Creek celebrated its first proper autumn festival. The town had changed remarkably since Hargrove's arrest. With the specter of his manipulation removed, legitimate businesses had begun to flourish. The territorial government had confirmed that the railroad would indeed pass nearby, not directly through Pine Creek as Hargrove had claimed, but close enough to bring prosperity without destroying the town's character. Isaac stood on the porch of the livery stable, his livery stable now, purchased with savings he'd never expected to use for anything permanent. Across the street, he could see Olivia arranging a display of harvest goods outside the general store. She looked up, somehow sensing his gaze, and smiled, that same smile that had first caught him unawares all those months ago. Joseph approached, carrying a load of lumber for the festival platform being constructed in the town square. His injuries had healed completely, and the Jensen claim was producing enough gold to support modest but steady income. "You planning to just stare at my sister all day?" he teased, "or are you going to help with these preparations?" Isaac grinned, an expression that came more naturally now than he would have believed possible. "Just taking a moment to appreciate the view." "Well, appreciate it later," Joseph retorted good-naturedly. "Pastor Williams wants to speak with both of you about the ceremony next month." "The ceremony." Isaac's hand went instinctively to his vest pocket, where a small gold ring waited, purchased from a traveling jeweler with the first profits from the livery. In 4 weeks, he and Olivia would be married in Pine Creek's newly completed church, with the whole town in attendance. It still amazed him sometimes how completely his life had transformed. The man who had ridden into Pine Creek believing the frontier was no place for connection, no place for putting down roots, had found both in abundance. The tough cowboy who had prided himself on needing no one now found his greatest strength in the family and community he'd helped build. As Isaac crossed the street to join Olivia, he reflected that his younger self would hardly recognize the man he had become. The hardness hadn't disappeared entirely. The frontier demanded a certain toughness to survive, but it had been tempered by something he had forgotten existed: joy. "What has you looking so thoughtful?" Olivia asked as he reached her, her blue eyes curious. Isaac took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that still made her blush delightfully. "Just thinking about how a smile can change everything," he said, even for a man who thought he was beyond changing. Olivia's expression softened. "We all have the capacity to change, Isaac. Sometimes we just need the right reason." As they stood together in the autumn sunshine, the town bustling around them, Isaac Jacobson, once drifter, now livery owner and soon-to-be husband, knew he had found more than reasons. He had found purpose, community, love. In the wild frontier that had once seemed fit only for solitary survival, he had discovered that the true strength lay not in standing alone, but in standing together. And it had all begun with a smile that made him weak in all the ways that mattered.